The belief in miracles provides a fragile thread of hope. Stories circulate of individuals miraculously recovering after fervent prayer or a visit to a holy shrine. These tales, however rare, fuel the desperate hope that divine intervention is possible, even as death surrounds them. Hey guys! Tonight we're taking a journey back in time, not to a grand castle or a bustling medieval market, but into the very heart of one of history's most terrifying scourges, the Black Death. Imagine yourself in a cramped, smoky hovel. The year is 1347, and a strange, dark cloud is beginning to creep across the horizon, bringing with it a sickness unlike any seen before. You feel a sudden chill, a strange ache in your limbs, and a knot of fear tightens in your stomach. Because, let's be honest, if you were living back then, you probably wouldn't survive. The remedies were, well, let's just say they were more about hope than healing. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. As the night deepens and the mournful tolling of the bells fades into the distance, you are left with a chilling understanding of the overwhelming reliance on religious interventions during the Black Death. In a world without scientific understanding, faith was the primary weapon against an incomprehensible enemy. From fervent prayers and penitential acts to desperate vows and solemn processions, medieval people poured their spiritual energy into combating the plague, hoping to appease an angry god or invoke a miraculous cure. Their devotion was absolute, their suffering immense, and their hope, tragically, often in vain. You find yourself standing on a bustling dockside, the air thick with the smell of salt, fish, and something else, something subtly putrid, carried on the wind from the newly arrived trading ships. The year is 1347, and the port city, perhaps Messina in Sicily, is a hive of activity. Merchants shout, sailors unload cargo, and the sounds of a vibrant medieval world fill your ears. But beneath the surface, an unseen terror is beginning to stir, a silent passenger on those very ships, ready to unleash an unimaginable horror upon the unsuspecting population. The desperate prayers and fervent acts of penance still echo in your mind, a testament to the overwhelming reliance on religious interventions during the Black Death. You've witnessed the initial terror, the flawed theories, the horrifying remedies, and the profound spiritual crisis. Now, as the plague continues its relentless sweep, claiming lives with terrifying speed, you're about to delve into another crucial, albeit rudimentary, aspect of the Dark Ages' response to the early attempts at containment. These were desperate, often brutal, and methods used to isolate the sick and to prevent the spread of the unseen killer. Born more of fear and observation than scientific understanding, you notice something unsettling. A few sailors, just disembarked, look unusually pale, their movements sluggish. One coughs, a deep, rattling sound that makes you instinctively step back. You see dark, angry swellings, like enormous boils, appearing in their armpits and groins. These are the first visible signs, the terrifying harbingers of what is to come. No one knows it yet, but these men are carrying death, not just for themselves, but for almost half of Europe. It's like watching a horror movie where you know the monster is lurking, but no one on screen does. You find yourself in a city where the initial panic has given way to a grim determination. The streets, once choked with fleeing refugees, are now eerily quiet, punctuated by the occasional creak of a death cart. The authorities, desperate to stem the tide of death, have begun to implement measures, however crude, to control the spread of the pestilence. You see guards posted at city gates, their faces grim, turning away anyone who approaches from an infected area. It's like trying to stop a flood with a single sandbag, but you're doing it with a lot of conviction. Within days, the whispers begin. People are falling ill, suddenly, violently. A neighbor, seemingly healthy yesterday, is found dead in their bed this morning, their body already turning black. The swellings, those dark, painful buboes, are appearing on more and more people. Fear, a cold, creeping dread, begins to grip the city. You see people crossing themselves, murmuring prayers, their eyes wide with a terror that has no name, no explanation. You witness the enforcement of quarantines. Ships arriving from plague-stricken ports are no longer allowed to dock immediately. Instead, they are ordered to anchor offshore for a period, often 30 days at Trentino, later extended to 40 days quarantino, which is where we get our modern word quarantine. You see the frustrated faces of sailors and merchants, their cargo rotting, as they wait, suspended between hope and the terrifying possibility that the plague has already taken root among them. The lack of understanding of the incubation period means that even after 40 days, an infected person could still develop symptoms. This is a common historical fact. The Black Death, caused by the bacterium Yersinia pestis, arrived in Europe in 1347 via trading ships, first striking port cities like Messina, Sicily, before rapidly spreading inland. This is a common historical fact, the practice of quarantining ships and travelers, initially for 30 then 40 days, emerged in medieval port cities like Ragusa, Dubrovnik, and Venice as an early, albeit imperfect, attempt to contain the spread of the Black Death. The speed of its arrival is horrifying. One day, life is normal, filled with the everyday concerns of medieval existence. The next, death is everywhere, an invisible predator stalking the streets. You see carts rumbling through the cobbled alleys, piled high with bodies, their faces contorted in agony, their skin often blackened. The bell of the church, once a comforting sound, now tolls almost incessantly, a mournful dirge for the endless dead. The sheer scale of the dying is incomprehensible. Houses where the plague has struck are marked. You see grim red crosses painted on doors, a chilling warning to all who pass by. Inside, the sick are often left to their fate, sometimes with their entire families confined with them. Food and water might be brought to the doorstep, but direct contact is avoided at all costs. The fear of contagion is so profound that even basic care is often abandoned, leaving the dying to suffer in isolation. It's like putting a "Do Not Disturb" sign on a house that's already on fire. You walk through the market, once vibrant, now eerily quiet. Stalls are abandoned, their wares left to rot. The air, once filled with the aroma of fresh bread and spices, now carries the stench of sickness and death. You see families huddled together, their faces pale, their eyes darting nervously, as if expecting the unseen killer to strike them next. The terror is palpable, a thick, suffocating blanket that smothers hope. A lesser-known detail about these early containment efforts is the practice of pest houses or lazarettos. As the plague raged, some cities began to establish dedicated isolation facilities outside their walls. These were rudimentary hospitals, often just repurposed buildings, where plague victims were forcibly confined. While intended to prevent spread, these places often became death traps, with little medical care and high mortality rates. But they represent an early, albeit brutal, attempt at centralized public health management. It's like building a very unpleasant, very crowded waiting room for death. A lesser-known detail about the initial arrival of the Black Death is the confusion surrounding its origin. Many people initially believed it was a form of poisoning, perhaps inflicted by enemies or even by marginalized groups within society. This misunderstanding led to widespread panic and often horrific scapegoating as communities desperately sought a human explanation for the inexplicable devastation. It's like trying to figure out why your computer crashed, and your first guess is that your neighbor cursed it. You observe the desperate attempts to dispose of the dead. As the death toll mounts, traditional burials become impossible. Mass graves, known as plague pits, are dug outside city walls. Bodies, often unceremoniously stripped and piled high, are dumped into these pits, sometimes covered with quicklime to hasten decomposition and prevent the spread of stench. The sanctity of individual burial, a cornerstone of medieval Christian belief, is sacrificed to the overwhelming need to remove the source of infection, or at least the visible signs of it. The symptoms are brutal and swift. You hear tales of people waking up feeling fine, only to develop a fever, chills, and excruciating pain by midday. By evening, the dreaded buboes appear, swelling rapidly to the size of an apple or even an orange, turning black and oozing pus. The pain from these swellings is said to be unbearable, a constant throbbing agony that drives victims to madness. Then comes the vomiting, the diarrhea, the internal bleeding, and finally, a swift, agonizing death. The speed of it all is terrifying. There's little time to even comprehend what's happening before it's over. Historians still debate the true effectiveness of these medieval containment measures. While they likely slowed the spread in some localized instances, the lack of understanding of the Yersinia pestis bacterium, its transmission vectors fleas and rats, and the airborne nature of pneumonic plague meant that these efforts were often fundamentally undermined. This open academic question highlights the tragic gap between their desperate intentions and the scientific reality of the disease. You see a physician, his face grim, examining a victim. He pokes at the buboes with a stick, trying to understand their nature. He tries to take a pulse, but the victim is already fading. He has no understanding of bacteria, no concept of contagion in the modern sense. He is as bewildered and helpless as everyone else, armed only with ancient theories and a growing sense of despair. You see cordons sanitaires being established around infected areas. These were attempts to create physical barriers, often enforced by guards or soldiers, to prevent anyone from entering or leaving a plague-stricken town or region. While difficult to maintain and often breached, they represent a desperate effort to create a literal wall against the invisible killer. The sight of armed men turning away desperate travelers, even their own kin, is a chilling testament to the ruthlessness born of fear. The sheer mystery of it adds to the horror. Where did it come from? Why is it striking some and sparing others? Why are the rich dying alongside the poor, the pious alongside the sinner? The lack of any rational explanation fuels wild speculation and profound terror. It's like a silent, invisible assassin, striking at random, leaving only death and unanswered questions in its wake. The burning of infected houses or possessions is another drastic measure you witness. If a house was particularly hard hit by the plague, or if its inhabitants had died, it might be set ablaze, in a desperate attempt to purify the area and destroy any lingering bad air or poison. While this might have destroyed some plague-carrying fleas, it also destroyed valuable property and displaced survivors, often without any real benefit against the disease itself. It's like trying to get rid of a mosquito by burning down your house. Historians still debate the precise mortality rate of the Black Death in different regions of Europe. While estimates generally range from 30% to 60% of the population, the exact figures vary significantly depending on local conditions, population density, and the specific strain of the plague. This open academic question highlights the enduring challenge of quantifying the full demographic impact of such a devastating pandemic. You observe the enforcement of public hygiene. Rudimentary as it was, decrees might be issued ordering citizens to clean their streets, remove refuse, and dispose of animal carcasses. While these measures were often difficult to enforce and limited in scope, they represent an early, albeit vague, recognition that filth and putrefaction were somehow linked to disease. You witness the breakdown of society. As more and more people die, the living become overwhelmed. There are not enough healthy hands to bury the dead, to care for the sick, or even to tend to the dying. Bodies lie in the streets, unburied, festering, adding to the grim tableau. The social fabric begins to fray, replaced by a desperate every-man-for-himself mentality. For those who refuse to comply with isolation orders, the consequences could be severe. You hear tales of individuals being forcibly confined, or even executed, for attempting to break quarantine. The fear of the plague was so overwhelming that communal survival often superseded individual liberties, leading to brutal enforcement of these early public health measures. The fear of contagion leads to desperate measures. People avoid contact with the sick, even their own family members. Doors are barred, windows shuttered. You see people wearing masks, not for protection against germs, but against the bad air or miasma that they believe carries the disease. They carry posies of fragrant herbs, hoping the sweet smells will ward off the pestilence. It's a desperate, futile dance against an invisible enemy. The psychological impact of these containment efforts is profound. For those confined, either in their homes or in pest houses, the isolation is a terrifying ordeal, compounded by the knowledge that they are likely to die. For those outside, the sight of marked houses and guarded gates serves as a constant, grim reminder of the ever-present threat, fueling paranoia and suspicion. The psychological toll is immense. Survivors are haunted by the images of death, by the loss of loved ones, by the constant fear that they too will be next. The normal rhythms of life are shattered, replaced by a morbid preoccupation with death and survival. You see people weeping openly in the streets, their grief raw and unrestrained. For there is no comfort, no escape. You see the desperate attempts to control animal populations, particularly rats, though without understanding their role in transmission. Cats and dogs might be killed, believed to carry the disease, a tragic misunderstanding that often worsened the problem by removing natural predators of rats. The plague doesn't discriminate. It sweeps through castles and hovels, sparing no one. Lords and ladies, peasants and priests, merchants and beggars, all fall before its relentless advance. The sheer universality of its devastation adds to its terror, shattering the rigid social structures of the medieval world. It's like a natural disaster that targets everyone, everywhere, all at once. The concept of clean air becomes paramount. People avoid crowded places, close windows, and try to stay in areas where the air is perceived to be fresh and pure. This leads to a further breakdown of social interaction and economic activity. As people retreat into their homes, fearing every breath they take outside, you hear stories of entire villages being wiped out, their populations decimated, leaving behind only silent and empty homes. Fields lie fallow, crops rot in the ground, for there is no one left to harvest them. The economic life of the region grinds to a halt, replaced by widespread famine and despair among the few who remain. You observe the use of plague doctors in their distinctive outfits, long cloaks, gloves, and the iconic bird-like mask with a beak filled with aromatic herbs. While their primary role was often to record deaths and offer limited advice, their appearance itself was a form of psychological containment, a grim symbol of the disease's presence and the desperate measures being taken. Their presence, however, did little to actually contain the disease. The medical knowledge of the time is utterly useless against such a foe. Physicians, trained in the ancient humoral theory, try their usual remedies, bloodletting, purging, applying poultices, but these interventions are like tiny drops of water against a raging inferno. They offer no relief, no cure, and often only hasten the victim's demise by weakening their already fragile bodies. The fear of contagion also led to the abandonment of the sick by their own families and communities. The bonds of kinship and neighborly compassion often dissolved in the face of overwhelming terror, leaving the afflicted to die alone. This self-imposed isolation, born of fear, was perhaps the most tragic form of containment. You see a physician, frustrated and desperate, trying to lance a bubo on a dying man. The pus that oozes out is foul, but the man's pain is still immense. The physician believes he is releasing the bad humors that cause the disease, but he is only adding to the victim's suffering and potentially spreading the infection. The helplessness of the medical profession in the face of such a powerful disease is heartbreaking. You hear about the establishment of health boards in some cities, rudimentary civic bodies tasked with managing the crisis. These boards would issue decrees, organize burials, and attempt to enforce quarantines, representing an early, desperate attempt at centralized public health governance. The spiritual explanations are equally terrifying. Many believe the plague is a divine punishment for humanity's sins, a scourge sent by an angry god. This belief leads to widespread acts of penance, flagellation, and fervent prayer as people desperately try to appease a wrathful deity. You see processions of flagellants, whipping themselves in the streets, hoping their suffering will atone for the sins of the world. The economic impact of these containment measures was immense. Trade routes were disrupted, markets closed, and agricultural production suffered as populations dwindled or fled. The very efforts to stop the plague often led to widespread famine and economic collapse among the survivors. The arrival of the Black Death is not just a medical catastrophe, it is a societal collapse. It shatters faith, breaks down order, and exposes the brutal fragility of human existence. The world you knew, a world of established routines and familiar comforts, is being ripped apart, replaced by a landscape of death, fear, and utter despair. You see the desperate attempts to purify the environment through fire. Large bonfires might be lit in public squares, or infected clothing and bedding burned, in a desperate attempt to cleanse the air and destroy any lingering poison. While this might have killed some fleas, it was largely ineffective against the widespread bacterium. You notice the rats scurrying through the shadows, their numbers seemingly endless, and the fleas, tiny, unseen creatures that bite and itch. No one connects these seemingly innocuous creatures to the terrifying sickness. They are just part of the background noise of medieval life, unwitting carriers of the very death that is consuming everything. As the night deepens, and the memory of these desperate containment efforts settles around you, you are left with a chilling understanding of the medieval world's struggle against the Black Death. From enforced quarantines and marked houses to mass graves and burning possessions, these were brutal, often futile attempts to control an invisible enemy. You are profoundly grateful for the scientific understanding of disease transmission and the effective public health measures that, in your own time, offer a far more humane and successful defense against such widespread devastation. As the first light of dawn begins to paint the sky, a faint pale glow on the horizon, you are left with a chilling understanding of the Black Death's arrival. It was not just a disease, it was an apocalyptic event, a sudden, brutal descent into chaos and death, leaving an indelible mark on the human psyche. The horrors were not just in the symptoms, but in the terrifying suddenness, the incomprehensible scale, and the utter helplessness with which a vulnerable medieval world faced its most formidable foe. The chilling reality of medieval containment efforts, from quarantines to mass graves, still casts a long shadow in your mind. You've witnessed the desperate attempts to outrun and isolate the unseen killer. Now, as the plague continues its relentless march, claiming lives with terrifying speed, you are about to delve into perhaps the most visceral and horrifying medical intervention of the Dark Ages, the lancing of the buboes. This was a crude, agonizing, and often fatal surgical attempt to treat the characteristic swellings of the plague. A desperate measure that often brought more suffering than relief. The terrifying memory of the Black Death's sudden arrival still chills you to the bone. The images of dying sailors and abandoned markets fresh in your mind? You've witnessed the incomprehensible scale of the devastation, the sheer helplessness in the face of an unseen enemy. Now, as the initial shock begins to settle, a new, equally terrifying question emerges in the minds of the medieval populace. Why is this happening? Is it a punishment from God? A malevolent force in the air? Or something else entirely? You're about to delve into the desperate, often contradictory, attempts of people in the Dark Ages to understand the mysterious cause of the devastating disease. A quest that often led to more fear than answers. You find yourself in a makeshift infirmary, perhaps a converted barn or a large tent, filled with the groans of the sick and the pervasive, sickening smell of pus and decay. A patient, their body racked with fever, lies on a rough wooden table. In their armpit, a bubo, dark and swollen to the size of a pigeon's egg, throbs ominously. It's a terrifying sight, a visible manifestation of the internal corruption that medieval physicians believed was consuming the body. It's like watching someone try to fix a leaky pipe by punching a hole in it. You stand in a crowded church, the air thick with incense and the desperate murmurs of prayer. The priest, his voice trembling, speaks of sin and divine retribution. He preaches that the plague is a direct punishment from God, a scourge sent to cleanse the world of its wickedness. You see people weeping, beating their chests, confessing their sins aloud, convinced that their own transgressions, or the collective sins of humanity, have brought this unimaginable suffering upon them. The idea is simple, terrifying, and offers a grim form of explanation. If God is angry, then repentance is the only hope. It's like your parents grounding you for a bad report card, but instead of losing video games, you lose your life. A surgeon, often a barber surgeon rather than a university-trained physician, approaches the patient. His hands are rough, his tools simple, a sharp knife, perhaps a heated iron, and plenty of linen bandages. There's no anesthesia as you know it, beyond perhaps a swig of strong wine or a prayer. The patient's eyes are wide with fear and pain, knowing what is about to happen. The atmosphere is grim, a stark tableau of suffering and desperate intervention. This is a common historical fact during the Black Death. A widespread belief was that the plague was divine punishment for humanity's sins, leading to widespread religious fervor, acts of penance, and flagellant movements. This is a common historical fact. The lancing and cauterization of buboes were common, albeit highly dangerous and often ineffective. Treatments for the Black Death, performed by barber surgeons or physicians in an attempt to drain the perceived poison from the body. You witness scenes of fervent religious devotion. People embark on pilgrimages, hoping to find solace or miraculous cures at holy sites. Others join processions, carrying relics and chanting prayers, their faces etched with desperation. You see flagellants, groups of men who whip themselves publicly, believing that their self-inflicted suffering will atone for sins and appease God's wrath. Their bare backs are a mass of bloody welts, yet they continue, driven by a terrifying conviction. The sight is both horrifying and mesmerizing, a testament to the profound spiritual crisis gripping the continent. The surgeon takes his knife, a crude but sharp blade. He presses it against the swollen bubo, and with a quick, decisive motion, he lances it. The patient screams a raw, guttural sound of agony that echoes in the confined space. A thick, foul-smelling pus, often mixed with blood, immediately begins to ooze from the incision, pooling into a basin held beneath. The sight and smell are nauseating, a visceral assault on your senses. The surgeon, however, sees this as a positive sign, believing he is releasing the bad humors or poison that has accumulated within the swelling. It's like trying to get rid of a bad smell by letting out all the rotten food from your fridge onto the floor. But not everyone believes in divine punishment alone. You hear other theories, whispered in hushed tones in taverns and market squares. Some speak of miasma, a corrupted or bad air that carries the disease. This idea, rooted in ancient Greek medical thought, suggests that the atmosphere itself has become poisonous, perhaps due to astrological alignments, earthquakes, or the putrefaction of organic matter. You see people carrying posies of fragrant herbs to their noses, hoping the sweet scents will purify the air they breathe and ward off the pestilence. Others burn aromatic woods and spices in their homes, trying to cleanse the very air they inhabit. It's like trying to stop a hurricane by lighting a scented candle. A lesser-known detail about the lancing of buboes was the variety of substances sometimes applied to the open wound afterward. Beyond simple poultices, some practitioners would pack the lanced bubo with mixtures containing ground herbs, animal excrement, or even arsenic, believing these would draw out more poison or prevent further putrefaction. These highly unsanitary and often toxic applications would have significantly increased the risk of secondary infections and further suffering. It's like trying to clean a wound by rubbing dirt into it. A lesser-known detail about the miasma theory during the Black Death was the specific astrological explanations. Many learned individuals and physicians believed that a conjunction of Saturn, Jupiter, and Mars in the sign of Aquarius in 1345 had created a great pestilence in the air, causing the plague. This complex astrological reasoning provided a seemingly scientific, albeit equally flawed, explanation for the disease's origin, blending celestial mechanics with earthly suffering. It's like blaming your bad hair day on a planetary alignment. After the bubo is lanced, the surgeon might attempt to squeeze out more pus, further agonizing the patient. He might then apply a heated iron or a cautery tool to the wound. The glowing red tip touches the raw flesh, and there's a hiss, a puff of smoke, and the sickening smell of burning tissue. The patient's screams reach a new crescendo, their body arching in pain. This cauterization was intended to stop the bleeding and to seal the wound, but it caused immense pain and tissue damage, and often did little to prevent the spread of the underlying infection. You observe physicians, their faces grim, trying to make sense of the unseen enemy. They are trained in the humoral theory, believing that illness is caused by an imbalance of the body's four humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. They try to fit the plague into this framework, suggesting that the bad air has corrupted the humors, leading to a sudden, violent imbalance. They might prescribe bloodletting, purging, or sweating, believing these actions will expel the corrupted humors from the body. Their theories are intricate, logical within their own flawed paradigm, but utterly useless against the bacterium Yersinia pestis. Historians still debate the true efficacy of lancing buboes. While some anecdotal evidence suggests that a small percentage of patients might have survived if the bubo ruptured naturally or was successfully drained, the vast majority of cases ended in death due to overwhelming infection, shock, or the trauma of the procedure itself. This open academic question highlights the desperate nature of these interventions, often performed without real hope of success. Historians still debate the extent to which the miasma theory and divine punishment coexisted or were prioritized by individuals during the Black Death. While both were widely believed, The emphasis might have shifted depending on local religious fervor, scientific or pseudoscientific understanding, and the immediate observable effects of the disease. This open academic question highlights the complex and often contradictory ways medieval people tried to make sense of the inexplicable. You observe the lack of sterile conditions. The surgeon's hands are bare, often unwashed. His knife, after being used on one patient, might be wiped clean with a cloth and then used on the next, without any concept of sterilization. The air is thick with dust, flies buzz around the open wounds, and the floor is often stained with blood and bodily fluids. The risk of introducing new, deadly bacteria into the already compromised body is incredibly high, turning the very act of healing into a vector for further infection. It's like trying to perform surgery in a garbage dump. You hear stories of strange phenomena preceding the plague comets streaking across the sky. Unusual weather patterns, even strange fogs. These are interpreted as ominous signs, portents of the coming disaster, further solidifying the belief that the plague is not a random event, but a divinely ordained or cosmically influenced catastrophe. The natural world itself seems to be conspiring against humanity. For buboes that were particularly large or resistant to lancing, some desperate measures involved applying leeches directly to the swelling, hoping they would draw out the poison. The sight of several dark, engorged leeches clinging to a throbbing bubo is a truly grotesque image, a testament to the lengths people would go in their fight against the plague. Some desperate individuals turn to more sinister explanations. You hear whispers of poisoning, of wells being tainted by enemies, or of marginalized groups deliberately spreading the disease. This fear often leads to horrific scapegoating, as communities, desperate for a human culprit, turn on those they already distrust. Jews, foreigners, and beggars are often targeted, subjected to violence and persecution, as people try to find a tangible enemy to blame for the invisible killer. It's a terrifying manifestation of fear and ignorance, a desperate search for control in a world spiraling into chaos. You hear about the plague stones or plague crosses that would sometimes be placed near the buboes, believed to have magical properties to draw out the disease. These were often smooth stones, sometimes heated, applied to the swelling. A folk remedy born of desperation and superstition. While harmless, they offered no real medical benefit. You witness the profound psychological impact of these theories. If the plague is divine punishment, then every cough, every fever, every swelling is a direct message from God, a judgment. This instills a deep sense of guilt and terror, making people question their own righteousness and that of their neighbors. If it's bad air, then every breath is a risk, every open window a potential portal for death. This constant anxiety permeates daily life, making even simple acts terrifying. The patient's post-operative care is minimal. After the bubo is lanced and cauterized, a simple linen bandage, often unsterile, is applied. There's no continuous monitoring of vital signs, no antibiotics to fight infection. The patient is left to recover, or more often, to succumb, their body battling both the plague and the trauma of the intervention. The lack of understanding of contagion as we know it is a critical blind spot. People see that the sick spread the disease, but they attribute it to the bad air emanating from the victim, or the spiritual corruption they carry, rather than to microscopic organisms. They don't understand the role of fleas, rats, or human-to-human transmission through respiratory droplets. This fundamental misunderstanding means that their attempts to prevent spread are often tragically ineffective. You see other methods of treating the buboes. Some practitioners would apply hot compresses, made from various herbs and even animal dung, hoping the heat would ripen the bubo and bring the poison to a head. Others would try to burn out the bubo with caustic substances, leading to severe chemical burns and further tissue damage. The ingenuity of their suffering is almost admirable. You see people trying to purify the air by ringing church bells, believing the vibrations will ward off the pestilence. Others fire cannons or burn strong-smelling substances like pitch and tar, hoping the smoke will cleanse the atmosphere. These desperate measures, while seemingly logical within the miasma theory, are utterly futile against the true cause of the disease. It's like trying to stop a flood by shouting at the river. The psychological impact on the patient is immense. The excruciating pain of the lancing, the fear of the surgeon's crude tools, and the knowledge that this agonizing procedure offered little chance of survival must have created a profound sense of terror and hopelessness. They were enduring torture for a cure that rarely came. The sheer scale of death also fuels the belief in supernatural causes. How else could so many people die so quickly? It must be something beyond human comprehension, something divine or demonic. The rational explanations available to them simply cannot account for the apocalyptic devastation they are witnessing. You observe the sheer desperation of families. They would beg the surgeon to try anything, to do whatever it took, to save their loved one, even if it meant enduring unimaginable pain. Their hope, however fragile, rested on these brutal interventions. You hear tales of plague saints, saints believed to have special powers to intercede with God and protect against the pestilence. People pray to Saint Sebastian, Saint Roch, and Saint Rosalia, offering vows and making fervent appeals for their protection. Religious processions become larger, more frequent, and more desperate, as communities try to invoke heavenly aid. The concept of pus as healing was prevalent. Physicians believed that the formation and drainage of pus were signs that the body was successfully expelling the morbid matter. Therefore, encouraging pus formation, even through painful means, was seen as a positive step towards recovery. This fundamental misunderstanding of infection contributed to many harmful practices. The concept of corrupted humors is constantly reiterated by physicians. They believe the miasma enters the body through the pores or breath, corrupting the blood and other humors, leading to the characteristic buboes and internal decay. Their treatments, therefore, the focus on purging these corrupted humors from the body through bleeding, vomiting, and defecation. You see a patient whose bubo has ruptured naturally, a rare occurrence that sometimes offered a slim chance of survival. However, even then, the open wound was highly susceptible to secondary infections, and without modern antibiotics, the patient often succumbed to sepsis. You observe the desperate search for remedies that align with these theories. If it's divine wrath, then prayer and penance are the cures. If it's bad air, then perfumes, strong smells, and purification rituals are the answer. The treatments are as varied and contradictory as the theories themselves, a chaotic mix of spiritual and pseudoscientific interventions. The tools used for lancing were often simple household knives, sharpened stones, or specialized surgical instruments that were rudimentary by modern standards. Their effectiveness depended entirely on the skill and daring of the practitioner, and the sheer resilience of the patient. The fear of the unknown is perhaps the most terrifying aspect of all. Without a clear understanding of the enemy, every shadow, every cough, every strange sensation becomes a source of profound anxiety. The lack of knowledge creates a fertile ground for wild speculation, superstition, and ultimately, more fear. You hear stories of plague doctors who, despite their iconic appearance, often had little formal medical training and resorted to these crude surgical interventions as their primary method of treatment. Their role was often more about managing the dead than truly healing the living. You see people trying to interpret the plague's behavior. Why does it strike some houses and spare others? Why do some people recover, while others die swiftly? These seemingly random patterns are often attributed to God's inscrutable will, or the unpredictable movements of the bad air, rather than the complex dynamics of disease transmission. The lack of understanding of the lymphatic system, which is where the buboes form, meant that physicians had no idea why these swellings appeared or how they related to the overall disease process. They were simply treating a symptom, a visible manifestation of the plague, without understanding its underlying pathology. The belief in the wrath of God also led to a significant increase in charitable acts and bequests to the church. As people desperately sought to earn divine favor and ensure their soul's salvation in the face of imminent death, it was a time of both profound terror and intense spiritual introspection. As the night deepens and the memory of the lancing of buboes fades into the background, you are left with a chilling understanding of the medieval world's desperate struggle against the Black Death. From the agonizing incision to the foul-smelling pus and the brutal cauterization, these were truly horrific attempts to combat an incomprehensible enemy. You are profoundly grateful for the scientific understanding of infection, the sterile surgical tools, and the effective antibiotics that, in your own time, offer a far more humane and successful defense against such devastating diseases. You notice the widespread use of amulets and charms, not just as protective measures, but also as diagnostic tools. Some believe that if a person fell ill while wearing a specific charm, it indicated that the charm was not strong enough. or that a more powerful demon was at work. The agonizing lancing of buboes and the grim reality of medieval surgical attempts still resonate in your mind, a testament to the desperate measures taken against the Black Death. You've witnessed the initial terror, the flawed theories, the horrifying remedies, and the brutal interventions. Now, as the plague continues its relentless sweep, claiming lives with terrifying speed, you're about to encounter one of the most enduring and unsettling symbols of this dark era, the iconic Plague Doctor. You'll uncover their eerie role and their limited, often ineffective, attempts at healing. A chilling figure in a world consumed by pestilence. As the sun sets, casting long, eerie shadows across the plague-stricken city, you are left with a chilling understanding of how people in the Dark Ages grappled with the Black Death. Their theories, born of fear and limited knowledge, were a desperate attempt to explain the inexplicable. Whether it was divine wrath or foul air, the underlying terror was the same, a profound helplessness in the face of an invisible, unstoppable killer. You are profoundly grateful for the scientific understanding that separates your understanding of disease from the desperate, often terrifying, explanations of the medieval world. You stand on a deserted street, the silence broken only by the distant tolling of a church bell. Suddenly, a figure emerges from the swirling mist, tall and cloaked, with a long bird-like beak protruding from its face. This is the Plague Doctor, a sight that would strike terror and a sliver of desperate hope into the hearts of medieval citizens. His appearance is striking, almost theatrical, designed to both protect him from the perceived bad air and to instill a sense of authority. It's like a very unsettling Halloween costume that also happens to be someone's job uniform. The chilling theories about divine wrath and bad air still swirl in your mind. Desperate attempts to explain the inexplicable devastation of the Black Death. You've witnessed the initial terror, the sheer scale of the dying, and the profound confusion gripping the medieval world. Now, as the plague's relentless march continues, sweeping through cities and countryside alike, you're about to see the most immediate and visceral reaction to this unseen killer flight. Fear and the desperate, often futile, attempts of communities and individuals to isolate themselves from the spreading pestilence. His costume is elaborate and distinctive. You see a heavy, ankle-length leather or waxed canvas coat, believed to be impenetrable by the miasma. Thick gloves cover his hands, and a wide-brimmed hat sits atop his head. But the most striking feature is the mask, a leather beak, often filled with aromatic herbs like mint, camphor, and cloves. These herbs were believed to filter the bad air, protecting the doctor from the pestilence. His eyes peer out from small glass inserts, giving him an eerie, almost inhuman gaze. He carries a long wooden stick, or pointer, which he uses to examine patients without direct contact, or to prod the dying. You stand on the outskirts of a large, once thriving city, perhaps Florence or London. The usual sounds of commerce and daily life are replaced by a new, terrifying cacophony, the creak of overloaded carts, the desperate cries of families, and the rhythmic pounding of horses' hooves on the cobbled roads. People are fleeing, a panicked exodus from the very places that once offered security and livelihood. They carry what little they can, their faces etched with a desperate hope to outrun the invisible enemy that has already claimed so many. It's like watching a stampede, but the predator is unseen, and the only escape is a desperate gamble. This is a common historical fact. The iconic Plague Doctor costume, with its distinctive beak mask, emerged in the 17th century later than the initial Black Death, but representing the enduring image of plague treatment, designed to protect the wearer from miasma and prevent direct contact with the sick. You see families, once prosperous, abandoning their homes and businesses, leaving behind everything they cannot carry. They are driven by a primal fear, the instinct to survive at any cost. Some head for the countryside, hoping the fresh air and isolation of rural life will protect them. Others seek refuge in remote villages or fortified castles, believing that distance and walls can keep the plague at bay. The roads are choked with refugees, a river of humanity flowing away from the centers of infection, spreading the terror as they go. You observe him as he approaches a house marked with a red cross. He enters, and you hear the muffled sounds of coughing and groaning from within. His role is often grim to record the deaths, sometimes to witness wills, and to offer what little comfort or medical advice he can. He might examine the buboes, perhaps lance them if he is also a barber surgeon, but his interventions are largely ineffective against the Yersinia pestis bacterium. He is more a grim reaper's assistant than a true healer. This is a common historical fact during the Black Death. A widespread and immediate reaction was for those who could afford to, particularly the wealthy, to flee infected urban centers for the countryside, hoping to escape the contagion. A lesser-known detail about plague doctors is that many of them were not formally trained physicians. Some were second-rate doctors unable to establish successful practices, while others were simply appointed by towns lacking medical professionals, sometimes with no medical training at all. Their primary qualification was often a willingness to risk their lives to attend to the plague-stricken, often for a salary. This meant that the quality of care they provided varied wildly, and was often based on superstition and traditional ineffective remedies. It's like hiring someone to fix your car, and their main qualification is that they're willing to touch a broken car. The wealthy, of course, have an advantage. You see noblemen and rich merchants, accompanied by their retinues, riding swiftly on horseback, their servants struggling to keep pace with carts laden with provisions. They retreat to their country estates, often bringing with them their physicians and a supply of aromatic herbs and wines, hoping to create a sanitized bubble of safety. Their isolation, however, is often an illusion. A servant, unknowingly infected, or a flea hidden in their baggage, can easily breach their defenses, bringing death even to the most secluded manner. The aromatic herbs in his beak mask were not just for protection, they were also believed to purify the air he breathed, aligning with the miasma theory of disease. He might also carry a small censer, burning fragrant resins to further cleanse the air around him. The strong smells were meant to ward off the stench of death and decay, which was believed to be a source of the plague itself. A lesser-known detail about this flight was the moral dilemma it posed for many. Clergy, physicians, and civic leaders often faced immense pressure to stay and tend to the sick and dying, fulfilling their duties. However, many, driven by their own fear of death, chose to flee, leading to accusations of cowardice and abandonment. This created a deep social rift, with some praising those who stayed as martyrs and condemning those who left as selfish. It's like being the captain of a sinking ship, and half the crew decides to take the lifeboats for themselves. Historians still debate the true effectiveness of the plague doctor's costume in preventing infection. While the heavy clothing and mask might have offered some rudimentary barrier against fleas and respiratory droplets, the lack of understanding of germ theory meant that the costume was not truly sterile, and the doctor could still become infected through other means. This open academic question highlights the gap between their perceived protection and the scientific reality of disease transmission. You witness the brutal reality of this desperate flight. Many, particularly the poor, have nowhere to go. They are trapped in the infected cities, or if they do flee, they are often turned away from villages and towns by fearful inhabitants who barricade their gates. You see desperate faces peering through cracks in wooden doors, refusing entry to anyone who might carry the pestilence. The compassion that once bound communities together begins to unravel, replaced by a chilling self-preservation. You see him using his pointer stick to turn over a dying patient, to inspect their buboes, or to simply keep a safe distance. This tool, while practical for avoiding direct contact, also emphasizes the dehumanizing aspect of his work. The sick are viewed as sources of contagion, to be approached with extreme caution, rather than as individuals in need of compassionate care. Historians still debate the effectiveness of these early, uncoordinated attempts at isolation. While fleeing could temporarily remove individuals from immediate exposure, the lack of understanding of disease transmission meant that they often carried the plague with them, inadvertently spreading it to previously untouched areas. This open academic question highlights the tragic irony of their desperate efforts, often contributing to the very spread they sought to prevent. His advice to patients is often limited and rooted in the prevailing theories. He might recommend more bloodletting, more purging, or the application of more bizarre poultices to the buboes. He might also advise on diet, hygiene as understood then, and the burning of aromatic substances in the home. His knowledge, however well-intentioned, is fundamentally flawed, and his treatments rarely bring about recovery. As the plague spreads, communities begin to implement more organized, albeit still rudimentary, forms of isolation. You hear decrees being read in town squares announcing quarantines. Ships arriving from infected ports are forced to anchor offshore for a period, sometimes 30 days of Trentino, later extended to 40 days Quarantino, from which we get the word quarantine. You see guards posted at city gates, turning away travelers, even those who appear healthy, fearing they might be silent carriers of death. You observe the psychological impact of his appearance on the sick. For some, his arrival might bring a glimmer of hope, a sign that someone is still willing to help. For others, his grim, bird-like visage is a terrifying omen, a harbinger of imminent death. The sight of him, cloaked and beaked, must have been a chilling confirmation that the plague had truly arrived at their doorstep. The sick are often isolated, sometimes forcibly. You see houses with red crosses painted on their doors, a grim warning to all who pass by. Inside, entire families might be dying, left to their fate, with only the occasional visit from a priest or a desperate relative. The fear of contagion is so profound that even basic care is often abandoned. The dying are left to suffer alone, their cries echoing in the silence of their quarantined homes. It's like being locked in a burning building, and everyone outside is too afraid to open the door. The plague doctor's role often extended beyond medical care. He might be tasked with counting the dead, recording their names, and reporting the numbers to city officials. He might also be involved in the enforcement of quarantines, ensuring that the sick remained isolated. His duties were administrative and public health oriented as much as they were medical. A grim statistician in a world of overwhelming death, you observe the psychological toll of this enforced isolation. Those who are healthy but confined to their homes live in a state of constant anxiety, listening for the telltale cough, watching for the dreaded swellings on their own bodies. The silence in the streets, once bustling with life, becomes oppressive, broken only by the mournful tolling of church bells or the creak of the death carts. The world shrinks to the confines of their homes, their minds consumed by fear. You hear stories of plague doctors who, despite their protective gear, succumb to the disease themselves, a tragic testament to the ineffectiveness of their costumes and the overwhelming virulence of the plague. Their sacrifices, however futile in terms of a cure, highlight the immense courage or desperation required to undertake such a perilous profession. For those who are sick and isolated, the experience is one of profound loneliness and despair. They are cut off from their loved ones, left to battle the excruciating symptoms of the plague alone. The lack of comfort, the absence of human touch, and the knowledge that death is likely imminent must have been a terrifying ordeal. The beak mask, while iconic, was a direct manifestation of the miasma theory. The belief was that the bad air could enter the body through the nose and mouth, and the strong-smelling herbs would purify this air before it was inhaled. It was a sensory defense against an invisible enemy, a desperate attempt to create a breathable and non-toxic environment. You see the grim reality of plague pits. As the death toll mounts, traditional burials become impossible. Mass graves are dug, often hastily. Outside city walls, bodies, sometimes still warm, are unceremoniously dumped into these pits, covered with a thin layer of earth, awaiting the next grim load. The sanctity of death, a cornerstone of medieval belief, is sacrificed to the overwhelming need to dispose of the dead before they can spread more disease. You see him carrying a small bag, perhaps containing some basic instruments like a lancet or a few vials of herbal remedies. His arsenal is meager, his power limited. He is fighting a war he cannot win, with tools that are utterly inadequate for the task. The fear of the plague also leads to a breakdown of law and order in some areas. With authorities overwhelmed or dead, looting becomes common. You hear stories of desperate individuals breaking into abandoned homes, stealing what they can, or preying on the sick and dying. The social contract phrase, replaced by a brutal struggle for survival. The plague doctor's presence often brought a sense of finality. His visit often meant that the patient was gravely ill, and that death was likely imminent. For families, his arrival was a grim signal, a confirmation of their worst fears. He was a symbol of the plague's unstoppable advance. You witnessed the abandonment of the sick by their own families. The fear of contagion is so strong that parents abandon their children, and children abandon their parents. Spouses flee from their dying partners. The bonds of kinship, once unbreakable, dissolve in the face of overwhelming terror. It's a heartbreaking testament to the power of fear to strip away humanity. You hear about the fees charged by plague doctors. While some were salaried by the city, others charged exorbitant fees, preying on the desperation of the sick and their families. This led to accusations of greed and exploitation, further tarnishing the image of a profession already struggling against an impossible foe. The impact on trade and travel is immense. Roads become deserted, ports lie empty, and commerce grinds to a halt. The fear of carrying the plague or encountering it makes travel incredibly dangerous and undesirable. This economic paralysis further exacerbates the suffering, leading to famine and widespread poverty among the survivors. The plague doctor's social standing was complex. He was both feared and respected, reviled and desperately sought after. He was a necessary evil, a grim functionary in a world consumed by death, performing tasks that no one else dared to undertake. You see the desperate attempts at personal protection. People wear heavy, often leather, clothing, believing it will prevent the bad air from entering their pores. They carry strong-smelling substances like garlic, onions, or vinegar-soaked sponges to their noses, hoping to ward off the miasma. Some even wear elaborate plague doctor costumes, with long cloaks and bird-like masks filled with aromatic herbs, believing this will protect them from the corrupted air. These measures, while visually striking, offer no real protection against the bacterium Yersinia pestis. You observe his interactions with the healthy. People recoil from him, giving him a wide berth, fearing that he might carry the pestilence on his very cloak. He is an outcast, a pariah, forever associated with death and disease, even as he tries to bring some semblance of order to the chaos. The psychological effects of living in a state of constant fear and isolation are profound. People become paranoid, suspicious of everyone, even their closest neighbors. Trust erodes, replaced by a pervasive sense of dread and suspicion. The very act of breathing becomes a source of anxiety, as the air itself is believed to be tainted with death. The psychological toll on the plague doctor himself must have been immense. Constantly surrounded by death, witnessing unimaginable suffering, and knowing the futility of most of his interventions would have been a profound burden. He lived in a world of constant fear, grief, and despair. You hear stories of people trying to outrun the plague by constantly moving, never staying in one place for too long. They become nomads of fear, wandering from town to town, only to find the plague has often arrived before them, or that they are unwelcome. Their lives become a relentless, futile chase against an invisible enemy. You see him making notes in a small book, perhaps recording the symptoms, the date of death, and the names of the deceased. These grim statistics were the only tangible outcome of his work, a stark record of the plague's relentless march. The concept of cordons sanitaires begins to emerge, though in a very rudimentary form. These were attempts to create physical barriers around infected areas, preventing anyone from entering or leaving. While difficult to enforce, they represent an early, desperate attempt at large-scale containment, a precursor to modern public health measures. As the night deepens and the eerie silhouette of the plague doctor fades into the shadows, you are left with a chilling understanding of his role in the Dark Ages. He was a symbol of both desperation and futility, a figure cloaked in fear and aromatic herbs, trying to combat an incomprehensible enemy with inadequate tools and flawed theories. You are profoundly grateful for the scientific understanding that has rendered such a figure obsolete. Replacing his grim presence with the precise knowledge and effective treatments of modern medicine, you observe the profound impact on religious life. Churches are often empty, as priests flee or die. Religious services are disrupted, and the comfort of communal prayer is lost. The spiritual guidance that once anchored medieval society begins to crumble under the weight of death and despair. The eerie silhouette of the plague doctor, with his beak mask and grim duties, still lingers in your mind, a chilling symbol of medieval desperation. You've witnessed the initial terror, the flawed theories, the horrifying remedies, and the brutal attempts at containment. Now, as the plague continues its relentless sweep, claiming lives with terrifying speed, you are about to delve into another profound and widespread aspect of the Dark Ages response, the pervasive use of charms, amulets, and superstition. In a world where scientific understanding was non-existent and medical interventions were largely futile, people turned to magic and folk remedies in a desperate fight against the unknown. As the night descends, casting a pall over the fear-stricken landscape, you are left with a chilling understanding of the immediate reactions to the Black Death. The flight, the fear, the desperate attempts at isolation. These were the raw, visceral responses to an incomprehensible horror. Communities fractured, individuals suffered in solitude, and the very fabric of society began to unravel. You are profoundly grateful for the scientific understanding of contagion and the public health measures that, in your own time, offer a far more effective and humane defense against such widespread devastation. You find yourself in a small and crowded home, the air thick with the smell of sickness and fear. A child lies feverish in bed, their breathing shallow. The parents, having exhausted what little medical advice was available, now turn to other means. You see them rummaging through a small wooden box, pulling out various objects: a dried toad, a piece of parchment inscribed with strange symbols, and a small, smooth stone. These are not medicines. They are charms and amulets, believed to possess a mystical power to ward off disease or draw out its influence. It's like trying to fix a broken car with a lucky rabbit's foot and a four-leaf clover. The desperate flight from infected cities and the chilling attempts at isolation still haunt your thoughts. A testament to the raw fear that gripped the medieval world. You've witnessed the initial terror and the futile efforts to outrun an invisible enemy. Now, as the plague continues its relentless sweep, claiming lives with horrifying speed, you are about to delve into the prevailing medical theories of the Dark Ages and the truly bizarre, often horrific, remedies that physicians and common folk alike applied to plague victims. This was a time when understanding was limited, and cures were often more about superstition and desperation than genuine healing. You watch as the mother ties a small bag, filled with dried herbs and a piece of garlic, around the child's neck. This is an amulet, believed to create a protective barrier against the bad air or evil spirits that cause the plague. The father mutters a short incantation, a whispered prayer to a protective saint, believing that the words themselves hold power. The desperation in their eyes is palpable, a raw hope clinging to any perceived defense against the invisible killer. You find yourself in a small, cramped room, the air thick with the smell of sickness and strange concoctions. A man lies on a rough bed, his body racked with fever, his skin mottled, and the dreaded buboes, dark and swollen, visible in his armpit. A physician, clad in simple robes, stands over him, his brow furrowed in concentration. He is not a modern doctor, armed with antibiotics and scientific knowledge. He is a product of his time, deeply entrenched in the humoral theory that has dominated medicine for centuries. To him, this man's suffering is a clear sign of an imbalance, a corruption of the vital fluids within his body. It's like trying to fix a complex machine with only a hammer and a vague idea of what's wrong. This is a common historical fact during the Black Death. People widely used various charms, amulets, and superstitious practices, believing they offered protection from the plague or could draw out its poison due to the lack of effective medical treatments. The physician explains, in hushed but confident tones, that the plague is caused by a corruption of the humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile, brought on by the bad air or miasma that has permeated the atmosphere. This corrupted air, he believes, enters the body through the pores or breath, poisoning the blood and causing it to putrefy. The buboes, those terrifying swellings, are merely the body's attempt to expel this internal corruption, to force the bad humors to the surface. The logic within their framework is perfectly sound, even if the premise is entirely incorrect. You see other individuals carrying pomanders, small perforated balls filled with aromatic substances like ambergris, musk, or fragrant herbs. These were not just for masking the stench of death. They were believed to purify the air around the wearer, acting as a personal shield against the miasma. The wealthy would wear elaborate, jewel-encrusted pomanders, while the poor might simply carry a clove of garlic or a bunch of rue. It's like wearing a very fancy air freshener, hoping it will stop a bullet. This is a common historical fact. Medieval physicians largely adhered to the ancient Greek humoral theory, believing the plague was caused by an imbalance or corruption of the body's four humors, often brought about by miasma, bad air. A lesser-known detail about these protective charms was the belief in plague rings. These rings, often made of silver and sometimes set with specific stones, were believed to have prophylactic qualities against the plague. Some were even inscribed with magical words or symbols. thought to offer an extra layer of protection. While undoubtedly beautiful, their efficacy against Yersinia pestis was, of course, non-existent. It's like wearing a lucky charm to prevent a computer virus. His first course of action is often bloodletting. You watch as he takes a sharp, crude lancet and makes an incision in the man's arm. A dark stream of blood flows into a basin. The physician believes that by removing this corrupted blood, he is literally draining the disease from the body, rebalancing the humors, and alleviating the inflammation. The patient, already weakened by the plague, becomes even more frail, perhaps even fainting from the blood loss. The physician, however, sees this faintness as a positive sign, evidence that the body is reacting, that the bad humors are being expelled. It's like trying to empty a bathtub by drilling a hole in the side, while the faucet is still running. You observe people performing various folk rituals. Some burn strong-smelling substances like pitch, tar, or sulfur in their homes, believing the acrid smoke will drive out the bad air. Others hang bundles of herbs over their doorways or scatter them on their floors, hoping to cleanse their living spaces. You see individuals carrying small bags of dried flowers or spices, constantly sniffing them to ward off the perceived contagion. A lesser-known detail about their bloodletting practices during the plague was the belief in venesection at the site of the bubo. While general bloodletting was common, some physicians believed that making an incision directly into or very near the bubo itself would be most effective in drawing out the concentrated poison or corrupted humor. This would have been excruciatingly painful and highly dangerous, increasing the risk of localized infection and sepsis. But it was seen as a direct assault on the disease, and it's like trying to remove a splinter by hitting it with a hammer. Historians still debate the precise origins and regional variations of many of these superstitious practices during the Black Death. While some practices had roots in ancient folk medicine, others emerged spontaneously from desperation and local beliefs. This open academic question highlights the diverse and often localized nature of human responses to an overwhelming crisis. Next, the physician might prescribe a powerful purgative or emetic. These concoctions, often made from potent herbs, minerals like mercury calomel, or even animal parts, were designed to induce violent vomiting or diarrhea. The goal was to cleanse the digestive tract of any lingering morbid matter or corrupted humors. You imagine the patient, already suffering from fever and buboes, enduring relentless retching or debilitating bouts of diarrhea, further dehydrating and weakening their already fragile body. The smell in the room becomes even more unbearable. You hear about plague papers or charms against the plague. These were pieces of parchment or paper inscribed with specific prayers, magical words, or symbols, sometimes even astrological charts. They were worn on the body, carried in pockets, or hung in homes, believed to offer protection. The words themselves were thought to hold power, a mystical barrier against the disease. The sheer volume of these charms being produced and sold speaks to the widespread desperation. Historians still debate the extent to which medieval physicians understood the concept of infection. Beyond the vague idea of bad air or contagion, while they observed that the sick spread disease, their lack of understanding of microorganisms meant they couldn't grasp the true mechanisms of transmission, leading to ineffective hygiene practices and remedies that often exacerbated the problem. This open academic question highlights the fundamental scientific gap that rendered their treatments largely futile. For those who had already contracted the plague, the superstitious remedies became even more bizarre. You might see a patient with a live chicken or pigeon strapped to their bubo, believing that the animal would draw out the disease. The bird, naturally, would often die, reinforcing the belief that it had absorbed the poison from the patient. The sight is both absurd and heartbreaking, a desperate attempt to transfer the illness. It's like trying to fix a flat tire by tying a bird to it. You see other bizarre remedies being prepared. For the buboes themselves, poultices are applied. These might be made from a mixture of herbs, tree resin, and even human or animal excrement. The belief was that these poultices would help to draw out the poison from the swellings, or to ripen them so they could be lanced. You wince at the thought of applying such foul mixtures to an open, festering wound. The stench is overwhelming. You observe people carrying bezoar stones, calcified masses found in the stomachs of certain animals, believed to be universal antidotes to poisons and diseases. These rare and expensive stones were highly prized. and ingesting their powdered form was thought to offer powerful protection or cure. Their true value, however, was purely symbolic. Some remedies involved the use of ground-up precious stones, like emeralds or sapphires, mixed into a paste or swallowed. The belief was that these rare and valuable stones possessed inherent magical or protective properties that could counteract the plague's influence. While harmless, they were certainly ineffective, and a costly waste of resources for desperate families. It's like trying to fix a broken engine by polishing the hood. The belief in specific plague saints also plays a significant role. People pray fervently to saints like Saint Rod, who was believed to have contracted and recovered from the plague, and Saint Sebastian, a martyr often depicted with arrows, symbolizing the plague's invisible strikes. Images and statues of these saints are carried in processions and placed in homes, believed to offer divine intercession. You hear about sweating therapies? Patients would be wrapped in heavy blankets and given hot drinks, sometimes infused with strong herbs, to induce profuse sweating. The idea was that the bad humors and poisons would be expelled from the body through the pores. While some detoxification might occur, the extreme heat and dehydration could be dangerous for an already feverish and weakened patient. You see people trying to interpret omens and signs. If a cat crosses their path, or a bird flies into their house, it might be seen as a bad omen, a sign that the plague is coming for them. Conversely, a lucky dream or a chance encounter might be interpreted as a sign of divine favor or protection. The world is seen through a lens of superstition, every event imbued with hidden meaning. For those suffering from the internal ravages of the plague, strange concoctions were administered orally. You might hear of potions containing dried toad, powdered unicorn horn if one could be found, which, of course, they couldn't, or even a mixture of vinegar and arsenic. The line between medicine and poison was often blurred, and the dosage was a matter of guesswork, often leading to further suffering or death. For those who developed the characteristic blackening of the skin acral necrosis, some folk remedies involved rubbing the affected areas with onions, garlic, or even a mixture of human excrement and herbs, hoping to draw out the blackness or cleanse the affected tissue. The pain and further infection from such remedies would have been immense. You observe the desperate attempts to mask the stench of death and disease. Strong-smelling herbs like rosemary, lavender, and rue are scattered on floors, burned as incense, or carried in posies. Physicians and wealthy individuals might carry pomanders, small perforated containers filled with aromatic substances, believing the sweet smells would purify the air and protect them from the miasma. The air, however, remains thick with the underlying smell of decay. You hear about plague water, a concoction made from various herbs, often distilled, and believed to have protective or curative properties against the plague. These waters were consumed orally or used to wash the body, offering a false sense of security. The psychological aspect of these remedies is profound. Patients, desperate for any hope, would submit to these painful and disgusting treatments, believing they were their only chance. The physician's confidence, however misguided, offered a glimmer of hope in a world consumed by despair. The very act of doing something, however ineffective, provided a sense of control against an uncontrollable foe. The fear of witches and sorcerers also intensified during the plague. If a person fell ill without a clear reason, or if a family was particularly hard hit, suspicion might fall on a local witch believed to have cast a curse. This led to accusations, trials, and often brutal persecution, as communities sought to eliminate perceived sources of magical malevolence. You see a physician attempting to fumigate a room with strong-smelling smoke, believing it will drive out the bad air and cleanse the space of the plague's influence. Sulfur, pitch, and various aromatic woods are burned, filling the room with acrid smoke that makes your eyes water and your throat burn. While this might have killed some insects, it did nothing to stop the Yersinia pestis bacterium. You observe the desperate attempts to purify the air through sound, the ringing of church bells, believed to ward off evil spirits and bad air, becomes almost constant. Some even fire cannons or guns, hoping the loud noise will scare away the pestilence. These actions, while providing a psychological release, offered no real protection. For the characteristic blackening of the skin acral necrosis, often seen in the later stages of the plague, physicians had no effective treatment. They might apply soothing ointments or try to warm the extremities, but the underlying circulatory collapse was beyond their understanding or capability. The use of blood of the innocent or firstborn remedies, though rare and horrific, also emerged in some desperate accounts. These involved the use of blood from healthy individuals, particularly children, in various rituals or concoctions, believed to transfer vitality or protective power. These were extreme manifestations of desperation and superstition. You hear about treacle or theriac, a complex medieval remedy with dozens of ingredients, often including opium, viper's flesh, and various herbs. This concoction was believed to be a universal antidote, capable of curing all poisons and diseases, including the plague. Patients would consume large quantities, often experiencing sedation from the opium, which might have been mistaken for improvement. You see people trying to avoid certain colors or wear specific clothing, believing it would ward off the plague. Dark colors, particularly black, were sometimes avoided, as they were associated with the disease's grim appearance. White or light colors were sometimes preferred, believed to be purer. The lack of sterile instruments was another horrific aspect. Lancets, scalpels, and other tools used for lancing buboes or bloodletting were rarely, if ever, sterilized between patients. This meant that physicians, in their attempts to heal, were often inadvertently spreading the very bacteria that caused the plague, or introducing secondary infections that hastened the patient's demise. It's like trying to fix a leak with a dirty sponge. The psychological impact of relying on superstition is profound. While these charms and rituals offered a sense of control and hope in a terrifying situation, they also fostered a deep-seated fear of unseen forces and a constant anxiety about whether one had done enough to protect oneself. The line between genuine belief and desperate delusion was often blurred. You see a patient, their body covered in painful boils and carbuncles. The physician might apply hot compresses or even try to burn the lesions with a heated iron, believing it would cauterize the infection and draw out the poison. The pain would be immense and the risk of further infection high. As the night deepens and the whispers of ancient incantations fade into the background, you are left with a chilling understanding of the pervasive role of charms, amulets, and superstition during the Black Death. In a world devoid of scientific answers, people clung to magic and folk remedies as their last line of defense against an incomprehensible enemy. Their desperation was absolute, their methods often bizarre, and their hope, tragically, often in vain. You are profoundly grateful for the scientific understanding that has replaced such desperate superstitions, offering true protection and effective treatments in your own time. The role of urine therapy was also present. Some physicians believed that drinking one's own urine or applying it topically could help cleanse the body of disease. This was another desperate and likely ineffective remedy based on a flawed understanding of bodily fluids. The lingering whispers of ancient incantations and the unsettling images of charms and amulets still echo in your mind, a testament to the desperate superstitions that gripped the medieval world. You've journeyed through the initial terror, the flawed theories, the horrifying remedies, the brutal attempts at containment, and the overwhelming reliance on faith and magic. Now, as the final chapter of our journey unfolds, you are about to witness the aftermath of the Black Death, the profound societal changes it wrought, and the slow, painful lessons learned from its devastating sweep across Europe. As the day fades into twilight, and the grim realities of medieval plague treatments settle around you, you are left with a profound sense of the desperate measures taken in the face of an incomprehensible enemy. From aggressive bloodletting and violent purges to bizarre concoctions and unsterile interventions, the treatments for the plague in the Dark Ages were a terrifying testament to human helplessness. You are profoundly grateful for the scientific understanding of disease and the targeted, effective treatments that define modern medicine, where a diagnosis of plague no longer means a journey into such agonizing and often fatal cures. Imagine yourself now standing amidst the ruins of a once thriving village, or in a city where the silence is more profound than the sounds. The year is a few decades after the initial onslaught of the Black Death, perhaps the late 14th or early 15th century. The immediate terror has subsided, replaced by a grim, pervasive sense of loss and a world irrevocably altered. The air no longer carries the stench of death, but the echoes of its passing are everywhere: abandoned fields, empty homes, and a population drastically reduced. It's like walking through a landscape after a massive storm, where the wreckage is everywhere, but the sky is clear. The bizarre concoctions and unsterile interventions of medieval plague treatments still linger in your mind, a testament to the desperate measures taken in the face of an incomprehensible enemy. You've witnessed the initial terror, the flawed theories, and the often horrifying remedies. Now, as the plague continues its relentless sweep, claiming lives with terrifying speed, you are about to delve into another profound aspect of the Dark Ages response. The overwhelming reliance on religious interventions, the fervent prayers, the solemn processions, and the desperate acts of penance, all in a desperate attempt to combat the seemingly unstoppable pestilence. The most immediate and profound impact is demographic. You see far fewer people. Entire families, entire villages have simply vanished. The labor force, the very backbone of medieval society, has been decimated. This sudden scarcity of labor, however, paradoxically leads to a significant shift in power dynamics. For the first time in centuries, peasants and laborers find themselves in a position of greater bargaining power. With fewer hands to work the land, landowners are forced to offer better wages, more favorable terms, and even freedom from serfdom to attract and retain workers. The rigid feudal system, once seemingly unshakable, begins to crack under the weight of so much death. You find yourself in a city gripped by a profound spiritual crisis. The usual sounds of daily life are muted, replaced by the almost constant tolling of church bells, a mournful dirge for the endless dead. The air is thick with the scent of incense, mingling with the pervasive odor of sickness and decay. People walk with bowed heads, their faces etched with fear and despair, their eyes often fixed on the heavens, searching for a sign, a miracle, a reprieve from the relentless death. It's like being in a constant state of emergency, but the only emergency service available is prayer. This is a common historical fact. The Black Death caused a massive demographic collapse in Europe, leading to severe labor shortages, which in turn significantly altered social and economic structures, empowering the surviving peasantry. You see a solemn procession winding its way through the narrow streets. Priests, clad in their vestments, lead the way, carrying crucifixes and sacred relics. Behind them, men, women, and even children follow, their voices hoarse from chanting prayers. Some carry candles, their flickering flames casting dancing shadows on the grim faces of the participants. The procession moves slowly, deliberately, a desperate plea to God, a collective act of repentance in the face of what many believe is divine wrath. You observe the economic consequences. Trade routes, once bustling, are now slow to recover. Markets are smaller, less vibrant. The production of goods and food has plummeted. However, for the survivors, the immediate aftermath can bring unexpected opportunities. With fewer people, there's more land, more resources, and often more wealth to go around. Those who survive the plague often find themselves inheriting property, moving into better homes, and enjoying a higher standard of living than their ancestors. It's like a terrible game of musical chairs, and the few survivors get all the seats. This is a common historical fact during the Black Death. Religious processions, fervent prayers, and acts of penance were widespread. As people believed the plague was divine punishment for their sins and sought to appease God, a lesser-known detail about the aftermath of the Black Death is its impact on urban planning and sanitation. While the immediate response to the plague often involved desperate and ineffective measures, the sheer scale of death forced some cities to reconsider their public hygiene. There was a gradual, albeit slow, recognition that crowded, unsanitary conditions contributed to disease. Some cities began to implement rudimentary waste disposal systems, improve water sources, and even widen streets. A nascent understanding of urban public health that would slowly develop over centuries. It's like realizing your messy room is making you sick, and you finally decide to pick up a broom. You witness scenes of public flagellation. Groups of men, known as flagellants, march through the streets, their bare backs exposed, rhythmically whipping themselves with leather scourges tipped with metal spikes. Blood streams down their backs, staining their simple tunics. They chant prayers and hymns, their eyes glazed with a fervent, almost ecstatic devotion. They believe that by inflicting suffering upon themselves, they are atoning for the sins of humanity, hoping their self-sacrifice will appease God's wrath and cause the plague to cease. The sight is both horrifying and mesmerizing, a chilling testament to the depth of their desperation. It's like trying to win a lottery by hitting yourself with a stick. The social fabric is profoundly changed. The old certainties are gone. The authority of the church, once absolute, is questioned by some who struggle to reconcile such widespread suffering with a benevolent God. The death of so many clergy members, and the perceived failure of prayer to stop the plague, leads to a crisis of faith for some, while others cling even more fiercely to their beliefs. You see a more skeptical, perhaps more pragmatic, worldview beginning to emerge. A lesser-known detail about the flagellant movement is its rapid spread and eventual condemnation by the church. While initially tolerated, their extreme practices, anti-clerical sentiments, and tendency to incite violence against perceived sinners, including Jews, eventually led Pope Clement VI to condemn them in 1349. This highlights the complex and often volatile interplay between popular religious fervor and institutional authority during the crisis. It's like a grassroots movement that gets so out of hand. Even its biggest supporters want it to stop. Historians still debate the extent to which the Black Death directly caused the decline of feudalism and the rise of a more capitalist economy. While the plague undoubtedly accelerated these processes by creating labor shortages and shifting wealth, many historians argue that these changes were already underway, and the plague merely acted as a powerful catalyst. This open academic question highlights the complex interplay of long-term trends and sudden catastrophic events in shaping history. You see people making desperate vows to God and the saints. They promise to build churches, donate vast sums to charity, or dedicate their lives to religious service if only they and their families are spared. These vows are made with a raw sincerity, born of profound terror. The fear of death, and the even greater fear of eternal damnation, drives them to extraordinary acts of piety. You witness the psychological scars left by the plague. Generations are haunted by the memory of death, by the loss of loved ones, and by the constant fear of recurrence. Art, literature, and music often reflect this morbid preoccupation with themes of death, decay, and the fragility of life becoming prevalent. The dance of death motif, depicting skeletons leading people from all walks of life, becomes a powerful cultural symbol, a grim reminder that death spares no one. Historians still debate the psychological impact of believing the plague was divine punishment. Did it lead to greater spiritual introspection and genuine repentance? Or did it primarily fuel despair, fatalism, and a sense of arbitrary judgment from an angry God? This open academic question highlights the complex and varied individual responses to such an overwhelming theological crisis. The medical profession, too, undergoes a slow, painful transformation. The utter failure of traditional humoral medicine against the plague forces some physicians to question the ancient dogmas. While bloodletting and purging continue for centuries, the seeds of doubt are sown. There's a growing emphasis on observation, on practical experience, and on understanding the disease itself, rather than simply relying on inherited theories. The plague, in its brutal efficiency, inadvertently pushes medicine towards a more empirical approach. The role of the clergy is central, yet often tragic. Priests, monks, and nuns are on the front lines, ministering to the sick and dying, hearing confessions and performing last rites. Many, through their selfless devotion, contract the plague themselves and die, leading to a severe shortage of spiritual guidance. You see empty pulpits, silent confessionals, and churches with fewer and fewer clergy, a chilling sign of the plague's indiscriminate reach. You see the slow emergence of public health measures, born of bitter experience. The concept of quarantine, first implemented in port cities, becomes more formalized. Cities begin to establish health boards or magistrates of health to monitor disease, enforce isolation, and manage waste disposal. While still rudimentary, these are the earliest forms of organized public health, a direct response to the overwhelming devastation of the plague. It's like finally realizing that if you don't clean up the mess, it just keeps getting worse. You observe the profound importance of prayer. Individuals and families spend hours on their knees, reciting paternosters and Ave Marias, begging for mercy. They light candles before icons and statues of saints, particularly those believed to have protective powers against disease, like Saint Sebastian and Saint Rai. The sound of collective prayer, a low, desperate hum, permeates the very fabric of the city. For the survivors, life is both harder and, in some ways, better. There's the immense grief and trauma, but also new opportunities. Land is cheaper, wages are higher, and social mobility, once almost impossible, becomes a real possibility. A peasant's son might now aspire to a trade or even to own land, dreams that were unimaginable before the plague. For those who are dying, the last rites are considered paramount. Confession, absolution, and anointing of the sick are believed to prepare the soul for its journey to the afterlife, ensuring salvation. You see priests, their faces pale and drawn, rushing from one dying bedside to another, risking their own lives to provide spiritual comfort and guidance in the face of overwhelming death. You hear stories of resilience, of communities slowly rebuilding, of people finding ways to adapt to a world forever changed. The human spirit, despite unimaginable suffering, finds ways to endure, to innovate, and to find new meaning in a world stripped bare by death. The belief in relics is also strong. People flock to churches that house the bones or possessions of saints, believing that proximity to these holy objects will offer protection or miraculous cures. You see desperate individuals pressing themselves against reliquaries, hoping to absorb some of the saint's power. This physical proximity, however, often serves as a vector for further disease transmission. A tragic irony. The Black Death also indirectly contributed to advancements in anatomical knowledge. With so many bodies available, and the traditional religious prohibitions on dissection sometimes relaxed in the face of overwhelming death. Some physicians were able to perform more dissections, gaining a better understanding of human anatomy. While still limited, this practical experience slowly chipped away at the theoretical dominance of ancient texts. You hear about the Dance of Death, a macabre artistic and literary theme that emerges during this period. It depicts skeletons or personified death-leading people from all walks of life. Kings, peasants, popes, children, in a grim dance. This reflects the pervasive sense of fatalism and the leveling effect of the plague, which spared no one, regardless of their social status or piety. You observe the long-term impact on religious institutions. While the church remained powerful, its moral authority was somewhat diminished by its perceived inability to stop the plague and the flight of some clergy. This contributed to a growing questioning of religious authority that would eventually lead to the Reformation centuries later. The emphasis on sin and repentance is constant. Sermons are filled with condemnations of worldly pleasures, luxury, and moral failings, all believed to have angered God and brought forth the pestilence. People are urged to confess their sins, to fast, and to give alms to the poor, hoping these acts of piety will avert divine wrath. The plague also led to a greater focus on individual piety and direct relationship with God. As people felt that the institutional church had failed them, this personal spiritual journey became more important for many, bypassing traditional intermediaries. You witness the profound impact on monastic communities. Monasteries, often self-contained and densely populated, become hotbeds of infection. Monks and nuns, living in close quarters, fall ill rapidly, and entire communities are decimated. The traditional role of monasteries as centers of learning and healing is severely disrupted. You see the rise of new forms of popular culture, often reflecting the morbid themes of the plague. Morality plays, allegories, and folk songs about death and the fragility of life become common, serving as both a form of collective grieving and a way to process the trauma. The fear of dying without confession or last rites is immense. People believe that if they die in a state of sin, their souls will be condemned to hell. This fear drives many to desperate acts of repentance, even as their bodies are ravaged by the plague. The spiritual agony is as profound as the physical suffering. The plague also had a significant impact on education. With the death of many scholars and teachers, universities and monastic schools suffered. However, in the long run, this created opportunities for new ideas and new approaches to learning. As the old guard was swept away, you see people wearing religious amulets and charms, not just for general protection, but specifically against the plague. These might include crosses, images of saints, or inscribed prayers, believed to possess a protective power against the disease. They are worn close to the body, a constant plea for divine intervention. You reflect on the sheer scale of the learning curve. It took centuries and multiple waves of plague for humanity to truly begin to understand infectious diseases. The lessons were hard-won, paid for in millions of lives, but they ultimately laid the groundwork for modern epidemiology, microbiology, and public health. The concept of intercession is central. People pray not only to God directly, but also to the Virgin Mary and various saints, believing that these holy figures can intercede on their behalf, pleading with God to lift the plague. The more powerful the saint, the more fervent the prayers. The memory of the plague, though it faded from immediate consciousness, remained a powerful undercurrent in European society for centuries. It shaped cultural attitudes towards death, hygiene, and the role of medicine. It was a constant reminder of humanity's vulnerability to the unseen forces of nature. You observe the sheer scale of death leading to a crisis of faith for some. How could a benevolent God allow such suffering? Why are the pious dying alongside the wicked? These questions, though whispered, begin to undermine the absolute certainty of medieval religious belief, leading to doubt and despair for some, while others cling even more fiercely to their faith. You consider the enduring power of human resilience. Despite the unimaginable suffering, the profound loss, and the utter helplessness in the face of the Black Death, humanity found a way to survive, adapt, and eventually to learn. The horrors of the plague were immense, but so too was the human spirit's capacity for endurance and renewal. The Church, despite its efforts, is largely powerless against the plague. Its rituals, prayers, and sacraments offer spiritual comfort but no physical cure. This helplessness, in the face of such overwhelming death, begins to erode its authority and influence in the long term, as the first light of a new dawn breaks, painting the sky with soft hues of hope. You are left with a profound sense of the Black Death's enduring legacy. It was a period of unimaginable horror, but one that, through its very devastation, forced humanity to confront its limitations, question its certainties, and slowly, painfully, begin the long journey towards a more scientific understanding of disease. The shadows of the plague may linger, but the lessons learned, etched in the collective memory of a continent, ultimately paved the way for a healthier, more resilient future. You see communities organizing special plague masses and public prayers, hoping that a collective act of devotion will turn the tide. These gatherings, while spiritually unifying, also serve as unwitting superspreader events, bringing more people into close contact and facilitating the disease's transmission.